Uh, Everyone, like Rick said, my name is Grant Luna. I'm a title representative at Fidelity National Title. I primarily work out of the PV, RPV, San Pedro area, but of course, can help you and your clients all throughout California with their real estate transactions, specifically regarding title insurance. So, our food for thought today will be covering how to read a preliminary title report. We thought it'd be helpful to give you a sense of how to best read preliminary reports. These are things that are a part of every single one of your real estate transactions. And I think me being a realtor before being a title rep, these were reports that at times maybe were a bit overwhelming just because there's a lot of information on there. And a lot of the times it might not, be super obvious exactly what you should be looking for, where to look, how to even begin looking at these things. And a lot of these times, having a general awareness of these reports can be helpful in just being able to quickly parse, this document, have a sense if there are red flags or things that need attention, at least so you can hopefully have better conversations with your clients. But ultimately, what I want to say in these reports is ideally you walk away from this with a general sense of how to look at a prelim quickly. But ultimately, I want you to know that whether it's me or a preferred title rep that you work with, we're always a resource for you. So we're always more than happy to look at these reports, talk to your clients, explain some of the key issues. But ideally, I still think it's beneficial for you all to have a good sense of how to master reading a prelims. By no intents and purpose do I mean, mastering title insurance. I still myself, I'm seeing new things on title reports every single day, but do think we can all have a good confidence in being able to quickly look at a prelim and know what to look for. So the title of today is Prelim Mastery: How to Avoid Hidden Title Issues That Can Derail Your Escrow. So I think the best way to do that in terms of avoiding hidden title issues is just knowing how to read a preliminary title report, what to look for, and where to look. So today we'll be looking at some slides. We'll have some nice informational notes, and then we'll also be looking at an actual report. So we'll be going through some of the major sections, explaining what they are, explaining what to look at, and see an actual report in the process. So I'll share these with everyone too, that I have your emails. I'll give you a sample report as well as these slides you can look back on, as well as some of the other resources that we'll cover today. And so just getting started, I think it's always important to have a sense of what is this report that we're, looking at, that you're getting in your transactions. What is the purpose of this report? So the general question, what is a preliminary title report? So a preliminary title report, or commonly referred to as a prelim, is a report that is issued by a title company. So in our case, Fidelity National Title, before providing title insurance. So it's a preliminary report giving some information about a property, and what it outlines are some of the main property details to be aware of, information about the property ownership and other title related matters. And those would be things like easements, liens, loans, rights, and restrictions that impact the property and the title to that property. And ultimately, what this is trying to do is helping your buyers, helping your sellers, helping lenders that are involved in a transaction understand items that affect the property that either need to be taken care of and removed from the property's title, or things that will be permanently a part of the property's title and ultimately need to be accepted by you and your buyer or seller clients. So that's what a preliminary title report is. And ultimately, it's something that is generated before issuing a title insurance policy. So it's a report in the ultimate aim to provide your buyer clients with a title insurance policy, or your buyer's lender with a title insurance policy. Happy to explain more about exactly what those title insurance policies are if people have questions, but this is mainly about preliminary reports. So what we'll do now is kind of look through a preliminary report, show you the main things really to be aware of when reading these reports and getting a sense of what to look at. So we'll start always with a cover page on your preliminary report. These are nice for you just to have a general sense of information about the property that you're requesting a title insurance preliminary report on. And so some of the key parts that you'll see on this cover page would be an order number for that transaction. This is nice if you're ever interacting with our title officers, and you even see our title officers information here. So most of the time you can always call me. We're more than happy to call our title officers, but forever, if like your escrow officer needs to reach out to a title officer, you have their information there, their phone number and their reference number for that transaction right here on this cover sheet. And you also have the property address. So we'll look at the actual preview here of a report. So we see that prelim number here, we see the title officer, and I've blanked out the property just for the sake of privacy. What I wanted to say about this cover sheet is it's really helpful to just make sure the property address is correct. Of course, we're always going to look at that and verify that for you, but where this could come up in maybe, Derail and Escrow is Maybe sometimes title companies are really busy. Maybe they generated a report for the wrong property. It's always important to know that preliminary title reports do take a decent amount of time to be created. They have to go through extensive public records, generate reports from all over the place, find liens and loans, etc. So sometimes it can take 2, 3, 4 days, even more if a property is really old and hasn't had a title insurance policy in a long time. So always get your reports, make sure that property address is correct, especially if it's time sensitive scenario, because you want to let your title representative know right away, hey, this property is incorrect. We need to generate a preliminary title report for the correct property because it will take a little bit of time. So on the cover sheet, you're mainly looking at the order number for reference, make sure that property is correct. This main boilerplate section here is giving an understanding for your clients, once again, what the point of a preliminary title report is. It's a report showing matters that impact property, things that need to be taken care of or accepted before proceeding with title insurance. And I did want to mention one key note about preliminary title reports, and this is not just our company, but all preliminary title reports, is that a preliminary report is not the end all be all of all matters that impact title. I think it's really important to have an understanding that title insurance companies are fairly limited on the documents they can pull. They're mainly looking at recorded matters. So things that have been publicly recorded, like easements, loans that have been sent down to the county recorder and recorded against a property. Let's say there are unrecorded matters that are very old that are not public records. Those are not going to be shown on a preliminary title report. So it's important to have that understanding. And one note that I did want to say that I forgot to mention on the last slide is that not every company's prelim will look exactly the same. So you might get a preliminary title report from us at Fidelity National Title that looks a little bit different than another title company's preliminary title report, but the general information will be the same. So some of the formatting might be different, but the main information you're looking for will be the same. So on the cover page, you're mainly looking at that, looking at the property address, making sure it's correct. So we'll kind of move on in our preliminary title report. And now we are looking at our ownership and property details. So on your preliminary report, on your ownership and property details, you'll be seeing things like a plant date. That is the latest date the title company has pulled data from official records to generate this report. So where this might be helpful is, let's say you've opened a preliminary title report for listing that you have 6 months from now. And you might have that listing, it's gone on the market, you've accepted a contract, now you're in escrow. Where it's really helpful to look at your preliminary title report and its plant date is to have an awareness that maybe, that was a 6-month-old prelim, and maybe some documents have been recorded from 6 months to today. So it's good to have an updated prelim. So if you're a buyer in a transaction and you get a preliminary title report from the selling agent, always look at your plant date, because you might see it and say, hey, this plant date is from 6 months ago. We need to request an updated preliminary title report from the selling party. So it's always good to look at that plant date. So when we look at that preliminary title report here, we're looking at this effective date right here. So for example, this preliminary title report that we're looking at, the most recent updates to this have been from March 21st. So there could have been some recorded matters that have happened from then until now. We also have the types of title policies that are included in the transaction. It's always good to see what exact title policies are included here. Now we see that we have an Alta homeowner's policy of title insurance. That is a title insurance policy given to a property owner. And we also see a loan policy. So if your buyer clients are getting a loan in transactions, their lender will also be receiving a title insurance policy. So in every single transaction, you'll be seeing that as well. And you'll also be seeing information about the type of estate for the property. This governs the rights to the property. We also see the type of actual vesting as well. So this would be if it's owned by a trust, if it's owned by individuals, if it's owned by LLCs. So it's good to see this. That shows the current title to the property. The key point that I wanted to mention here is sometimes you might get preliminary title reports where the title doesn't exactly match what you or your clients think it should be here. So maybe you see this ownership and property details information section here, and maybe this title section doesn't look exactly like you think it does. Sometimes it might just need additional documentation to properly update the current vesting. For example, maybe they did some prior transfers outside of an escrow, and that title company just needs additional verification to make sure that title should be updated. But also sometimes there can be genuine mistakes. So if you ever get a preliminary title report from us or another title company, and there's a mismatch between what you think the title should be vested as or what your clients think the title should be vested as and what it's actually showing, always reach out to your title officers, your title representatives, and they can do additional digging. And the last section that you'll see on this ownership and informational section is a legal description of the property. So either you'll see it right here in this section, or you might see that you should see an attached Exhibit A. And so we can scroll down right here and see this Exhibit A. And so this will have the subdivision map description of the property right here. And this is also a major section a lot of the times where you'll see a reference to mineral rights. You might have clients that are curious to see if a property has retained mineral rights for subsurface drilling, for oil or other subsurface minerals. Usually in a legal description is where that will be mentioned. So for example, in this report here, we see that this property is described as being in Lot 30 of Tract 25157 in the city of Los Angeles. But we also see, importantly, that this property does not have oil, gas, or mineral rights. So a lot of the times, if your clients have questions about mineral rights, whether they come with the property moving forward, the first place really to look is the legal description of a property. That will help you get a sense of whether those are included in the property. So that is the ownership and property details section. That's really where you're going to see the plant date to get an awareness of how recent this preliminary title report has been created, the types of title policies that are included in this report, the type of ownership, whether it's a fee simple or leasehold estate, different types of property ownerships, the title to the property, and then legal description. So that's what you'll really be looking at the ownership and property details. I think the main points really to take away from this are make sure you have a recent updated prelim so you're not missing out on key items, and also make sure the title is showing as you think it should be showing as. So that is the ownership and property details section. This, I would say, is the main meat of every single one of your preliminary title reports, the exceptions section. So this would be, in my opinion, the main part of where you should be spending your time analyzing preliminary title reports in order to avoid costly mistakes or things that might derail your transaction. So to get a sense of what exceptions to preliminary title reports are. Ultimately, exceptions are items that affect title that will either have to be accepted as things that permanently are associated with a property's title, or items that need to be taken care of. Ultimately, what exceptions are is items that will not be covered by title insurance. Ultimately, it's a way for a title company to say, hey, these are matters that currently impact title that your clients can't come back to us and claim that there is some form of financial loss because of some of these items that impact title. It's in essence a title company doing their due diligence, looking at all public recorded matters affecting a title, letting your clients and you and the lender know about these matters that impact title and saying, hey, we're letting you know about these. You can't come back to us later and say that we didn't let you know and try to, make do on that insurance policy that we've given you in that process. So these will be most of the time unique matters that impact a property that are worth taking a look at with your clients. And so some common exceptions that you'll see on a preliminary title report would be property taxes. You'll see those on every single one of your properties. That will be usually the first exception listed on a property because it is a lien on a property that in a way does provide some form of financial loss to a client. They have to pay out property taxes each year. We let them know about that. It's not something we cover in our title insurance policy. Easements, of course, those are agreements between either the city or nearby neighbors to be able to use a part of the property. Those are fairly common exceptions as well. CC&Rs, those are covenants, conditions, and restrictions. A lot of the times you'll see those from homeowners associations that govern the ability to use the common grounds or repairing their condominium unit. But sometimes you'll also see those for non-condo complexes. And those, a lot of the times, were created by developers, sometimes in the past, that govern the use of homes in a general subdivision. So if you ever see CC&Rs on one of your prelims and you're confused because it's not a condominium complex, it's probably the case that a developer back in the day bought an entire tract of properties, created CC&Rs for all of the homes in that subdivision, and now it's something that permanently rides with the title of the property. And you'll also see covenants and agreements. Those might be agreements with the city to maintain city sewer lines, etc. So these common exceptions you'll see on most of your preliminary title reports, and these are things, like I mentioned, that are either needing to be taken care of or things that just need to be accepted by you and your clients. In this case, most of the common exceptions are items that your clients really can't do much to remove from a preliminary title report. They ultimately need to have an awareness of and accept as things that will permanently impact the title to a property. Other items on the exception section, and we'll take a look at one of those that actually require some attention or action, and it can actually be removed from a preliminary title report. Those would be deeds of trust. Those would be loans associated with a property. So those would be, typical, a residential loan to buy a property. You'll also see credit lines. Let's say they took out, a home equity line of credit on the property or a personal loan from someone. That will be listed in the exceptions. Reverse mortgages will also be included in there as well. Also, uninsured deeds. Those would be prior transfers that were done outside of an escrow process and never received title insurance. So an example of that might be a property owner transferring the property from himself to his trust, or from, a person A to person B, but it was never actually looked at by a title insurance company, and as a result is something that needs to be taken care of in a future transaction. You'll also see judgments. That would be a court case that has been settled, and now there's a financial payment that is due as a result of that. You'll see liens that could be state income tax liens or lis pendens. Those could be ongoing litigation and lawsuits. The only major red flag in a lot of the preliminary title reports that can derail an escrow would be a lis pendens. That would be an ongoing court case that doesn't have, a fixed deadline of when this is going to be settled. So if you're looking at your preliminary title reports and you see a lis pendens, that ultimately, unfortunately, might be a bit of a red flag, especially if you're trying to open escrow and close in 30 days when that court case might be, 6 months out from being resolved. Most of these other exceptions that you'll see on the prelim are things that are fairly easy to be taken care of. They usually just require, being paid off at the close of escrow. And so looking at your exception sections on a prelim, you're really just looking at, in this sense, these 2 pages here that are listing these exceptions. So for example, we'll see that these items here are mentioning property taxes, which are a lien on a property. This is mentioning that these are for next year's property taxes. They're a lien on the property. They're not yet due and payable, but ultimately exceptions, listing these property taxes is the company saying, hey, this is a lien on the property. If it impacts the property's title, it will always impact the property's title, and it's not something that we are covering in our title insurance policy. Your client can't come to us a year later and say, hey, I got a bill in the mail for $8,000. That impacts, gives me financial loss. It impacts my title. I want to go to the title company. Us stating that in the exceptions, it's saying we do not cover that. Your client needs to be aware of that. You'll usually see the current property taxes listed for the property, and you'll also see the amounts and whether they've been paid or not. So in this case, we'll see that there's 2 installments of property taxes. The first have been paid here. The second installment is open. Like most of us know, property taxes due twice a year. The deadline just passed. So sometimes, you might see some unpaid property taxes on here. It's not a major reason to be concerned because, like I said, most of these items can be taken care of at the close of escrow. And you'll also see things like supplemental taxes that are lien on a property, different things like water rights that impact a property. Also pay attention to things like easements. Like I said, usually you'll see a description about what an exception item is. So for example, this is saying this is an easement on a property, and then it will have a purpose. So for example, this is saying this is an easement for public utilities. Most of these are fairly standard. You'll see a lot of easements for city maintenance of utilities, etc. You'll also see covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Those are those CC&Rs that I talked about. So for HOA complexes or subdivisions, you'll see CC&Rs that impact a property. More easements here granted for the public telephone company for maintaining poles, for example. You'll see deeds of trust fairly frequently. Those are loans associated with a property. A keynote about deeds of trust are the amounts. Those are the original amounts of the loan. So that's not the remaining amount to be paid off. So that will be something that escrows need to find out and get an exact payoff amount during the close of a transaction. And if you see multiple loans, not a major red flag. It's just saying there's multiple loans associated with a property that need to be paid off. To have a good sense, sometimes it could be helpful as a listing agent to have a sense of who to reach out to pay off a loan. So you'll usually look out for the company here, so for the beneficiary here. So you can have a sense that Bank of America is the person that provided the loan. That's the person that needs to be reached out to pay off the loan, and other uninsured deeds as well. And I did want to show examples, because I don't have one on this report, of some other items that might be red flags, and what those might look like. So in the exception section here, so for example, some of these liens, so for example, a tax lien, usually you'll see a tax lien here and you'll have an amount, basically, that would be unpaid property taxes here. Here's a judgment, like I mentioned, that would be a past court case that has actually been settled, and now there's an actual payoff amount that is due. Like I said, that might seem like a major red flag, but since it has an amount that needs to be paid off, it actually makes it fairly straightforward because escrow can say, okay, we just need to, reach out to this person, see how much they need to be satisfied to release that judgment. They'll pay them off, get the release of judgment, and take care of that. And then you might see something like this. This is what I mentioned, that lis pendens, a pending court action. That unfortunately is somewhat of, a headache in an escrow process because there is no set date of when this, lis pendens might be taken care of and removed from a preliminary report. So we're not going to dive too much into the exceptions and look at every exception that might exist, but just have a general sense of this section here is listing unique items for this property. So that might be loans associated with the property, easements associated with the property, CC&Rs associated with this specific property that either your clients need to accept as something that's permanently associated with the property or something that can be taken care of and removed. So this is where I would spend most of my time looking at preliminary title reports. If I was you, each time before you meet with a client, to let them know things that are fairly standard, things that might, take some time and require extra attention. And like I said, those are things I'm always happy to go over with you and your clients. So finishing up with the main part of the preliminary title reports to be aware of in terms of knowing what you need to do and how to go about doing it would be the requirements section of a preliminary title report. So that would be right after the exceptions. So we see this end of exceptions here. In the next page, you'll see this requirements section right here. And so the requirements section are items and actions that are needed to clear title and issue title insurance. So usually what they do is help establish the current owner that they have the ability to clearly give title to the next person or resolve any issues before closing on this transaction. So a lot of the times what you'll see in this section are a statement of information that's ultimately required for every single transaction for every party that's involved in the transaction. Usually that's going to be cases of mistaken identity. It clears up that. It gets their name, social security number, past employment information, etc. Usually, a lot of the times, some of your clients might be overwhelmed and say, why do I need to fill this out? Why didn't they need all this information? Where it might be helpful is, let's say you get a preliminary title report and someone sees a child support judgment on there and they say, hey, I don't have any kids. Why is this child support judgment associated with me? Why is it on this prelim? And they might freak out. That's where you, having an awareness of prelims, can say, hey, don't worry, this is a preliminary title report. It's not the end all be all. All we need to do is fill out a statement of information. That might clear out some of that. That might be a different person completely that has the same name as you or a similar name as you. Let's get that statement of information filled out. We can take care of those items. It is also potential where your client submits a statement of information and new items get added to the prelim as well. So let's say that this is their first property they owned. Maybe they have, an unpaid tax lien that was never associated with a property. Maybe they fill out the statement of information and now that item can get added. So that's a key takeaway. Get the statement of information filled out and submitted as soon as possible. It's a nice additional step to make sure you have the most accurate prelim. Other things you'll commonly see in the requirements section would be things like trust documentation if the property is owned in a trust, LLC documentation that is required if the property is owned by an LLC, and sometimes you'll see some spousal interest that needs to be taken care of. Let's say a property is owned by someone that is married, but their husband or wife is not on title. There might be a requirement to have that spouse relinquish some of their rights in the property or to sign off on some of the documents associated with a property. So for example, we have our requirements section here. Item 1 says that the company requires a statement of information. Like I said, you'll pretty much see that on all of your preliminary title reports. In this case, this property was owned by a trust. So what it's asking for is that it requires a trust certification. That is just a one-page, a couple-page document that certifies the information about the trust, who the trustees are, who can sign off on the property. It is very important to note, though, with trusts, because you see a lot of them, that a trust certification is, in most cases, only allowed if the current trustees on title are still alive. So that can be a very common thing that can derail a lot of escrows or properties that are owned by a trust. So if you are approaching a listing presentation, you get a preliminary title report from us, you see that title is held on a trust, it's going to give you an indication that you're going to need additional documentation. So you're either going to need a trust certification if the trustees are alive, or a full copy of the trust if the trustees are deceased. So we actually see that here in this third item, that the company will require either a complete copy of the trust agreement and any amendments to that trust if the trustees are alive, or a trust certification here. So that's honestly, seen a lot of prelims. One of the most common vestings we see nowadays are trusts, and even, needing to make sure you have the property documentation to do that. So the requirements section will give you an indication of the items that are needed. So moving forward, we have a boilerplate breakdown. We're kind of finishing up. I know we're almost out of time here, but most of the preliminary title report from this point forward is a lot of boilerplate. So you have an informational notes section. That's Fidelity National Title or any title company giving you general informational notes for you or your clients, saying that documents need to be notarized, for example, or that properties in California are subject to documentary transfer tax. These are not unique items for property. So I wouldn't get stuck too much in the weeds with your clients about informational notes. It's general information that is going to be standard across a lot of your reports. You'll also get standard exclusions from coverage in your reports. Same thing, it's a lot of information. It's basically 4 to 5 pages of additional exclusions, but these are standard exclusions. Every single title company in California will have the same exclusions on a title insurance policy. These are additional items that are not covered by title insurance. So those would be things like changes in zoning laws or eminent domain, for example. Those are things that could impact the financial status of a property owner or their title to a property, but are not things that are covered by a title insurance policy. So of course, your client, if they really wanted to, can look at all of the exceptions, or sorry, not the exceptions, but the exclusions on a preliminary title report, but have an awareness that these are not unique items to a prelim. If you go to any title insurance company, they're going to have the same exclusions on a report. You also have notice of available discounts. So for example, if your clients are in the military or they're impacted by wildfires, they can get insurance discounts. You'll get a wire fraud alert on all of your prelims as well. You'll get a privacy notice letting your clients know that we're handling a lot of sensitive information and we'll keep that private. We're getting social security numbers, names, addresses, employment information, etc. We do a great job at Fidelity National Title in making sure that information is private. And then moving forward, we get an alt information collection form. That's something that's used by title insurance companies and escrows to gather information. Ultimately, in a sense, to try to give you an awareness that a lot of this information in this prelim report ends up being boilerplate. So if your clients really want to go through that, we are happy to do so. And then you also have an assessor's parcel map here. So you'll get in a sense of the property, the dimensions of the property, where exactly it is. And I did want to mention here, let's say you have clients that are really interested in, the lot, the dimensions of the lot. They want to see where the easements are. We always have services where we can plot out the easements for you, get inspectors to look at a property for you, etc., and get the exact dimensions for that report. So in essence, what I wanted to do to wrap up today is to give a sense of best practices for preliminary title reports. So the first thing that I wanted to say is order your preliminary title report early. Like I said, they take some time to generate, maybe 3-4 days at times, especially if it's an older property. They take time to gather the information, but then also sometimes it takes time to release items from the preliminary title report, especially if there's old loans that need to be reached out to and be paid off, or maybe some people that need to be tracked down for additional documentation. Title, unfortunately, sometimes can be a bit slow. So if you have a listing presentation coming up a few months from now or a listing going live, get it ordered way ahead of time. We're more than happy to do the research, make sure that your title is going to be taken care of early. The other thing, like I mentioned, is have your clients fill out their statement of information early. That can take care of some items that need to be removed from the report. But like I said, it can also add additional items to the preliminary report that need to be taken care of. And then also lean on your team. That's something that I want to emphasize a ton. You will never bother me by saying, hey, Grant, can you walk me through a preliminary title report before I meet with my buyer client? I know they're going to ask a lot of tough questions and I don't feel as confident. Give me a call. I'm happy to talk you through these preliminary reports, let you know how they work. And I'm even happy to hop on a call with your client. If your client, has additional questions, you've done your best at explaining things, but you don't feel as confident. Say, hey, Grant, are you happy to, hop on a call with my client and me tomorrow so we can talk about this preliminary report before we release our inspection contingency? Always lean on me, and I'm more than happy to help. And additional resources that I wanted to mention that make our preliminary title reports somewhat easier to understand is right before the cover page. This is that cover page we looked at. Pay attention to this first page here. We have this section called our Fidelity First Alert on all of our Fidelity National Title prelims. So if you click this blue link here, you'll get taken to a page that looks something like this. This is called our live look. Soon it will be called title look and will be updated. What this does is it takes that preliminary title report and puts it in a really nice digestible summary for you to have an easier time of looking through these preliminary reports. So for example, it's going to provide the title to the property, the address to the property, most of that information like we talked about on the ownership and property details information page. We got our plant date right there, which shows the most recent date at which property records were brought in. We have all of those exceptions to the policy that we looked at as well. So items that impact title that need to be taken care of or accepted. It's a little bit easier just to come in here and look at some of these. And the nice part is all of these actually have hyperlinked documents. So let's say your client wanted to actually look at this easement and see, exactly where in the property it was or have information on it. They can click on this and see the actual recorded document here. And then it will have requirements here, so additional information. So it makes it easier for you, if you're sitting with your client and you didn't want to have to show them a 35-page report where, 20 pages of those are boilerplate. You just wanted a really nice, meat and potatoes, main part of the prelim report. This is for you. So this is a nice little section that you can pay attention to. So I know that was a bit of a speed run. I know we only have 30 minutes for today to really look at preliminary title reports, but the main thing I wanted to try to emphasize to you are the key sections really to spend your time. And like I said, I think you'll never reach a point where you've seen all of the possible items that will be on a preliminary title report. But the main takeaway to avoid things that will derail your escrow would be get started early. Lean on us. We're happy to help you along the way. So that's pretty much it for today. I'm happy to help with additional questions. I know preliminary reports are a pretty daunting 30-minute topic, but hopefully, that was a good starter for all of you here.
All right, cool. Thanks for the great information today, Grant. Any questions for Grant before he leaves? Go ahead and unmute yourself. And if not, then we will give you Grant's information so that you can't contact him. 30 minutes, it really isn't a lot to go do a deep dive. So just know that Grant and his team are available for you in case you do have further questions. And the sooner that you can call them, the better it is for you and your client. So anything else before we end it for today, Grant?
No, I'm super grateful that all of you came. And this is my first attempt at trying to do a prelim class in 30 minutes. So halfway through, I think I realized that this is maybe more information than is good, but hopefully it's so helpful. I really appreciate the people that did come. It's nice to see some new names and familiar names as well. And like Rick said, honestly, I think the best thing is, lean on us. It's my full-time job, right? Is to look at prelims and reports, but hopefully the main takeaways of just getting started early, some main things to be aware of is helpful for you in your business. So I appreciate all of your time in showing up today.
All right, great. All right. Thanks, Grant. And thanks
Yeah.
everybody for showing up. And we'll
Thanks.
see you next time. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.